Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Access to Economic Opportunity Helps in Homelessness. We will be digging into the new opportunities in the 2019 COC program, NOFA. Folks are joining us, but I'm going to go ahead and get us started today, and people can join. I'm going to be going through a little bit of the housekeeping and stuff like that first. So let's get started. We have a great group of speakers today that will be sharing specifically about the opportunities in the NOFA, but also more generally about partnerships across the homeless service system and the workforce system. And we will hear from them in a little bit. But first, some housekeeping. So over on the sidebar, you'll see a questions or chat box. This is where you can submit questions to our team. My colleague, Katie Schnurr, will be fielding those questions. Also, as the presenters are presenting, if you have questions for a specific speaker, you can go ahead and put those questions in the chat box as they present. Katie will be collecting those questions, and we will address those at the end of the webinar during our Q&A session. The first question is always, will the slides be made available, and is this webinar being recorded? So yes and yes. You'll get a follow-up email either today or Monday with a link to both the recording and the slide deck. So also, if you're on social media, you can tweet with us using the hashtag COCNOFA and share all of the awesome things you're learning today. So before we hear from our amazing speakers, I'll share a little bit about who we are. The Heartland Alliance is a 130-year-old human rights organization headquartered in Chicago, but serving folks throughout the Midwest and globally as well. Heartland Alliance is made up of 5 different companies employing over 1,700 human rights workers. For example, one of our companies is Heartland Housing. They develop and manage affordable housing facilities throughout the Midwest, in the greater Chicago area and a couple other places in the Midwest. And Heartland Healthcare is actually the largest healthcare provider of folks experiencing homelessness in the Chicago area. So we feel very lucky to be a part of this organization where we can kind of draw information and learn lessons from different sectors. So our team, situated in this kind of large organization, is our small but mighty team, the National Initiatives on Poverty and Economic Opportunity. We're housed within the Research and Policy Division of Heartland Alliance, and we are dedicated to addressing the root causes of unemployment, poverty, and inequity. We're also a really fun group of people, if I do say so myself. So we like to say that we work at the intersection of practice, policy, and research to catalyze change that is practical, informed by evidence, and grounded in experience. So I'll just say, when we talk about being grounded in experience, a lot of this for us means, first and foremost, the experiences of folks experiencing poverty, inequity, folks who've been excluded from economic systems, and also we value highly the experience of the practitioners and frontline workers working alongside these folks. And that's just a little bit of how we see our role in advancing the work. So one of our national initiatives is the National Center on Employment and Homelessness. So our vision is to ensure that everyone experiencing homelessness who wants to work achieves employment and the income needed for long-term housing stability. So this is grounded in our knowledge that housing stability and income stability are linked. They go hand in hand. And also just our belief that anybody who wants to work should be able to find a quality job. And so that's kind of like the driving force behind this, this initiative. So among the things that we do under NCEH are our place-based projects and the work we do in communities. So our most recent round of place-based projects is the Pathways Forward Challenge. We kicked this initiative or this project off back in June. There was a competitive process in which we selected 7 communities who are working to create equitable pathways to employment for homeless job seekers in their communities through systems change and collaboration. So we're really excited. We just started working with these communities. A few of them we've worked with in the past, a few of them we're relatively new to. Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, up there in the corner, you'll get to hear from the Pathways Forward Challenge team from there later in the webinar today. So I will share a little bit more about where you can find more resources on our website at the end of this webinar. And before I introduce our first speaker, I would love to hear, find out a little bit more about you all. So in just a second, let me launch the poll. Okay, so if you can tell us a little bit about you. I know that these categories maybe don't fit everyone perfectly, so if you fall into more than one category, you know, you should be able to click more than one. This will help us to get a sense of who the audience is who we're talking to today. Okay, great. So as expected, there's a lot of homeless service folks, providers, and systems leaders, but a good chunk of folks are identified on the workforce side as well. We're getting some others. I don't know, Katie, it might be easiest if you're getting a sense of how folks are identifying in the chat box. If you want to hop on and share a little bit of who you're seeing there, that might be helpful. Okay, looks like a lot of folks have voted. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this.
Expanding the chat box. I'm seeing some employment specialists, transitional housing managers, public housing authority, collaborative applicants. Yeah, it looks like lots of folks who are in the homeless service system from across the country.
Awesome, wonderful. Okay, let me see if I hide the poll. Okay, can y'all see my screen again?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, I was expecting a lot of folks to identify on the homeless service provider, systems leader side, but it looks like we have some diversity here. So welcome everybody. This is very exciting. With that, I'm gonna toss it over to our first presenter, Jasmine Hayes. She's the Deputy Director of the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. So Jasmine, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. If we can go to the next slide. So again, thank you, Carrie, and hello, everyone. Really pleased on behalf of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness to be joining today's discussion on opportunities in the Continuum of Care COC program NOFA that are focused on advancing the policy priority on increasing employment. And that priority is grounded in Home Together, the federal strategic plan to prevent and end homelessness, which places an increased focus on the role of employment as a critical element of efforts to both prevent and to support sustained exits from homelessness. We can move to the next slide. So this slide captures some of the most relevant strategies in Home Together that are informing our federal activities. And what I would point out here is the intent of our increased focus on employment. As we advance efforts to prevent and end homelessness, we're prioritizing strategies to achieve stronger outcomes and ensure that homelessness is a one-time experience with those actions that are going to bring people into the workforce and support their economic mobility. And that's why USICH, and if we can go to the next slide, please, in coordination with our partners at the Departments of Labor and Housing and Urban Development, work together. And I really want to thank our friends at Heartland for their support in this effort. We worked with DOL and HUD to develop a joint statement that is directed to both the homeless services system and the larger workforce system on how education, training, and employment can support communities via the COC NOFA in connecting job seekers experiencing homelessness to career opportunities and further strengthen those pathways to employment. I encourage you to read the statement. It does link to both Home Together and the NOFA, and it provides a high-level overview of strategies for stakeholders. So from the homeless services and housing partner lens, there's emphasis on the kinds of partnerships that can be leveraged to increase access to education, training, and employment. That includes state or local workforce development boards so that communities are promoting employment opportunities for people experiencing homelessness, as well as thinking about co-enrollment in workforce and homeless assistance programs so that we're ensuring that priority focus on the need for income to ensure housing that can be sustained. Other partnerships that are highlighted here are partnerships with the private sector. So that could mean job fairs or partnering with staffing agencies, for example. They also call out education and training program partnerships because we need to ensure that we're thinking about meaningful employment opportunities for all individuals, and that does include supported employment opportunities. And that's a very quick snapshot through the homeless services lens. And now I'm going to switch over to the workforce development system and what that system can do to advance employment and economic opportunities. So here the statement encourages strategies to co-enroll participants in employment, training, and education services. Most of the individuals that we're talking about here fall under that priority of service category of individuals that should be served under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act for individualized career and training services. And that leads to the second strategy that's highlighted, encouraging funding for evidence-based models of employment, training, and education so that participants can be successful both in the short and the long term. So that is a very quick overview. I think as you hear from Mindy, digging deeper into the NOFA itself, and then we hear from our community partners that are going to help us see how you operationalize some of these partnerships. This really then reinforces the intent behind the statement, which we see as a really good step forward, right? That this is an opportunity to hear directly from HUD and DOL, who are walking together in coordination with USICH and our other federal partners. And so we do anticipate that moving forward, we will continue to develop both targeted messaging and, as important, guidance to the field so that, again, both the homeless services side and our workforce partners are getting consistent messaging from HUD and from DOL. So I do want to pause there. I think there'll probably be time for questions later, but I want to thank Heartland for inviting me to join today. I did add a handful of links on the next slide. You can just go there. Those are just some of the resources that I think are particularly helpful as you're moving through the NOFA application process and building those cross-system partnerships. And they call out some of those areas that were highlighted in the joint statement. So again, just really focusing particularly on the partnerships piece, and we see this as the way that you lay that foundation for this cross-system work, right? So I think key takeaways from the homeless services side would be look for those opportunities to partner with your state and local workforce development board. Think about ways to engage training programs, local education programs, to promote opportunities for on-the-job training, for apprenticeships, for vocational opportunities. Work with your public and private organizations. Think about the private employers or private organizations that you can engage. Don't forget about the opportunity for individuals who may need supported employment. And then for our workforce partners, same idea around partnerships, but think about ways that you can encourage co-enrolling individuals who are being served in your programs to ensure that they have access to housing supports that would then help them to stay stable in their career opportunities. We want to ensure that we are looking for opportunities to fund evidence-based models related to employment, training, and education. And we also want to ensure that as we are supporting individuals exiting homelessness into career opportunities and longer-term career pathways, that we are paying attention to the related supports like childcare, like access to healthcare, access to transportation, that are essential for all households to be able to stay successfully housed and successfully engaged in their employment. So with that, I'm going to hand it back, I believe, to Carrie.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I mean, I think you've been thank you to you for your partnership and advancing this work and making sure there's a spotlight on it at the federal agency level. I think we need effort on all levels. So thank you for that. So next, I'm going to introduce Mindy Mitchell from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. She's going to share a little, maybe dig a little bit more into the NOFA itself. All right, take it away, Mindy.
Thanks, Carrie. Yes, I am going to talk about this super exciting COC NOFA. I know you all love it so much, especially seeing that there were so many COC folks on the webinar. I know right now you all are in NOFA hell. But first, I did want to talk about how we all should be using the NOFA as a tool. You know, the COC program is designed to promote a community-wide commitment to end homelessness. So we really shouldn't see the NOFA as just about the competition or what points are available for what, but rather as a roadmap. You can change the slide, Carrie. It's a roadmap that we can and should be using all year long to help us think about how we're going to reduce and ultimately end homelessness in our communities. Now, I know right now you all feel like there's a few months out of the year that you have to be away from the actual work of ending homelessness. And there is a lot to do to complete the application, and it's one of the most difficult periods of the year. You all are almost done. Hang in there. Many communities can attest to the notion, though, that the NOFA can and should actually be a very helpful part of the work all year long ending homelessness. And it's because it gives you this opportunity to make strategic decisions that change and improve your system's response to homelessness. Of course, that work starts by focusing on outcomes. To make homelessness rare, brief, and one-time, some important outcomes that we're focusing on are reducing the number of people experiencing homelessness. Communities with a high unsheltered population particularly should prioritize reducing unsheltered homelessness, especially for single adults, as everyone knows, who make up the largest portion of unsheltered population in our communities. Communities, of course, also focus on reducing the length of time that people experience homelessness, increasing exits from the homelessness system to permanent housing, and reducing returns to homelessness. So what you're asking during this all year long process that the NOFA gives you a roadmap for is what decisions can we make to meet those outcomes? How do the interventions that we currently have impact those outcomes? And those outcomes then guide the community's vision to ending homelessness. And really importantly for today's conversation, connecting people to employment can improve all of those outcomes. So during the year, of course, communities should be conducting their required gaps analysis Now, that's not a wish list of things you think you need. It's really data-driven. It's utilizing point in time and housing inventory count data, using evaluations of project performance, and importantly, using meaningful consumer input to determine your community's specific needs. And then you evaluate the community's portfolio of projects to make sure that they actually align with the community's needs. And when it's done well, this process results in a community-wide understanding of where the COC is headed. Of course, the plan may not result in consensus and often will require COC boards and other policymakers to have to make difficult decisions about what changes are needed to improve those outcomes. But finally, those outcomes become the criteria we should use to determine if we're successfully reducing homelessness. So through that data-driven, outcome-oriented lens, we then determine whether we have the right mix of projects to meet the needs of households experiencing homelessness in our communities. We have to look at both the supply of projects that we have and the demand on those projects from people experiencing homelessness. Inevitably, of course, in many of our communities, the demand for housing assistance far exceeds the demand for housing assistance far exceeds the supply, especially for individual homeless adults, like I mentioned earlier. And this is, again, another reason why we also should be focusing on improving employment outcomes. Next slide. So that brings us to the exciting new change in this year's NOFA, of course. While COCs have always been assessed on the performance measure of increasing income and employment, this year's NOFA will make increasing employment a policy priority. And that's a good thing because at its most basic level, homelessness is a mismatch between how much housing costs and how much someone can pay for housing. So we can and should be working on that problem on both sides of the equation, especially for those folks that we talked about earlier who are unlikely to get any housing intervention due to scarce homelessness resources. So to help balance those scales for people experiencing homelessness, this year both COCs and the programs funded by them should prioritize employment opportunities for the people they serve by working with employers and employment agencies in their communities. COCs should also be promoting partnerships with local organizations that promote employment. And to demonstrate the importance of this policy priority, this kind of cross-system collaboration is incentivized throughout the NOFA at both the system and the program levels. At the system level, there are increased points, up to 5 this year, for increasing the employment income of people being served through the COC. There are also 6 additional new points for promoting and increasing employment opportunities by developing strong partnerships with local workforce systems and education and training organizations to include prioritized access for those resources for people experiencing homelessness. COCs should also develop partnerships with local private employers and other organizations to improve employment outcomes. And all of these efforts and others should be made with the goal of increasing employment opportunities and income for people who are experiencing homelessness, including folks living in PSH. And finally, at the program level, new projects are now required to coordinate and integrate with mainstream systems to ensure that participants in their programs get connected to those resources. Now, this can include things like Medicaid or food stamps, but it should also include connecting people to the resources available to them through their local workforce system. And of course, we're going to hear about a great example of that kind of partnership from our main presenters. But first, I have one more slide. Okay, so now that we have clearly seen the importance of employment in this year's NOFA, I just want to bring us back to those performance measures that I talked about a couple of slides ago. Of course, you all see how improving employment outcomes for people experiencing or at risk of homelessness also improves the performance of our homelessness systems and programs overall. And that's beyond just that existing performance measure that specifically addresses employment and income. Particularly, if we can create strong partnerships between the homelessness system and employers and workforce development in our communities, we can improve both prevention and diversion. reducing the number of people who actually become homeless, so that important performance measure. Next, if we can get people experiencing homelessness connected to employment opportunities, we can reduce the length of time they experience homelessness, especially for those folks who may never get access to our scarce housing interventions. And finally, we can better assure that people receiving assistance through the COC don't return to homelessness by making sure that they get connected to jobs that will help them maintain housing after homelessness assistance ends. Another really important system performance measure. So that's it for me. And like I said, our next presenters are going to really give you a great example of how you can make all that happen and improve those performance measures in your own community. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Mindy. And I will just say that this last slide that we're looking at was supposed to be like animated and super cool, but I messed it up when I formatted the slides. So that's on me.
I don't think anyone who knows me would be surprised.
All right, thanks so much. So I am excited to present our next team of presenters. So they model their partnership even in their presentations, webinar presentations. And I will just say from day one that I've begun working with Allegheny County and the Pittsburg area. This team, they've demonstrated just really strong collaboration with each other, and that's demonstrated in the work that they're doing. So I will turn it over to Allegheny County.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's afternoon for everyone. We're maybe ahead of everyone, but anyway, I'm Peter Harvey, so I'm with Allegheny County Department of Human Services. I work with the Homeless Bureau, and I'm joined this afternoon with Cynthia and Markese. And yeah, we're from the great city of Pittsburg and Allegheny County, home of champions, including the Pittsburg Riverhounds. And we're going to do a poll later to see if you can guess which sport is connected to that Riverhounds. But before we get to that, we're going to go through this presentation. And really the structure of the presentation is to look at the different headings that were part of the DOL HUD joint statement and look at some of the activities that we've done, that we're currently doing, and things we plan to do. And just with this initial slide, I mean, it's a good start that you should have some recognition of the importance of employment and its connection to ending homelessness in your strategic plan. And we have this strategic plan is a couple of years old, so it's a good place to start. Next slide. So as I said, we're going to go through the different headings in the joint statement and take a look at some of the activities that we're doing. So the first one, partnership with local workforce development boards.
Hi, everyone. This is Cynthia Shields, and I am currently with the Allegheny County Department of Human Services, but we're fortunate that before I came here, I spent several years at our local workforce development board, where I led the adult workforce system and also established some of our strongest community partnerships. So it's fantastic to be here, and you'll hear a little bit later from one of our other presenters who is currently at the workforce board, but used to be a Department of Human Services employee. So partially how we've been able to keep such strong relationships is by poaching staff quite frequently. But we're excited to be here, like Peter said, to talk about some of the stuff we're doing. And so some of the things that we've done on our journey in collaboration has been figuring out how do our programs work together. And so we've tried a handful of things. Some have been really successful, some have been not quite as successful, but have still taught us some great lessons learned that we're hopeful that we're excited to share with you. The first one up there, you'll see Fantastic Forum, and that is not a typo. That is what happens when you ask people at the end of a very long day, hey, we've created something really cool here, what should we name it? And so this came out of the Workforce Development Board and DHS leadership talking about the different challenges that they were having serving people, and figuring out that we were serving a lot of the same people, but not necessarily serving them in a coordinated and aligned way. And so we pulled a group together of DHS, which is where the COC and HMIS lead for the county, we pulled together a group of DHS-funded providers along with a group of workforce board-funded providers and sat together and kind of journey mapped the experience of clients in our system and found out that on average, everyone we were serving was touching about 12 different organizations with at least 9 case managers, and none of them were coordinating or collaborating with each other, and people were kind of stepping on toes, and service wasn't necessarily being provided in a streamlined way. And so through that, we started figuring out how can we work together to at least align our systems in a way that people have access to all of the services that they need to be economically mobile, to be independent, and to have healthy, happy, productive lives. And a lot of the initiatives that you'll hear about were seeds from some of that work. And so I'll tell you about a couple of those and then turn it back over to Peter. But one of the coolest things that we did was a CareerLink co-enrollment pilot. And so I know in different areas, these are one-stops, these are American Job Centers, but in Pennsylvania, our one-stop center is called the PA CareerLink. And we piloted funding human service needs through our CFBG money and funding workforce development through the one-stop system. And we piloted it with about 25 individuals and learned a few things about how easy or not easy it is to send somebody to a place that they've never been before and just say, hey, go ask for Jim, and he'll know that you're coming, and he'll know how to get you into the system. And so we found that it was really challenging. We started listening to participants who were involved in both systems and saying, what happened when you tried to access services at either system, and figuring out where some of those gaps and things that we could work on were. But that was really one of the crucial things that we did, is actually just pilot. And so one of the things I think we've learned is that piloting is your friend, and try new things. So, some of the other stuff that we've done, we have a Learn and Earn Summer Youth Employment Program, which we've partnered again with our Workforce Development Board to offer specific tracks for youth who are in homeless shelters so that we can provide services in the shelter and provide them with training and work experience during the summer, which has been really successful, and we've got some great success stories that have come out of that.
So back to me, Peter. So another thing we've done, and this is partly through the Pathways Forward Challenge, is trying to integrate leadership across the workforce system and DHS and the Homeless Bureau. And so we have the director of Allegheny County Human Services, Mark Chernas, sits on the board of Partner for Work. We have the, I'm going to forget her title.
Chief Program Officer.
Chief Program Officer, thank you, Cynthia, with Partner for Work, who's will begin sitting on the Homeless Advisory Board of the COC. We've also had sort of joint evaluations of proposals for workforce proposals. We've had homeless providers sitting on those reviews and vice versa. So we've begun to integrate those at that level. And I think we're going to talk throughout this presentation, our remarks about the Pathways Forward Challenge, but Carrie mentioned at the outset, and we're really excited to be part of this cohort, and we'll be talking about some of the things we plan to do as a part of that initiative. Next slide. So we're going to look at promoting partnerships and access with private employers, and quickly on this. So one of the organizations I'll talk about a little bit later is the Employment and Training Advisory Board, or ETAB. And this is a group made up of workforce people and training organizations and homeless providers. We meet regularly to try to make employment-related services more effective for folks experiencing homelessness. And one of the things we've done in the last year or two is hosted employer roundtables. We've tried to keep them relatively small so we really can have a good conversation with employers, but we've brought together local employers along with homeless providers and training folks, and just have a discussion about how their systems work, hoping that each silo sort of better understand the needs and challenges of each silo, So those have been successful, and I think all of you who are involved in this work know a lot of it's about establishing those personal relationships, and those kind of informal roundtables are a good opportunity for homeless providers to connect directly with employers and build on those relationships. So next slide, please.
Yeah.
Markese?
Yeah, I was just going to just talk a little bit about the employer roundtables that Peter had just mentioned. So I'm representing our workforce board here in Allegheny County, and regarding those employer roundtables, one of the biggest things that we hear a lot of is you have the employers come in, and once the employers come in, they never really hire any of the individuals. So what we are trying to do in order to navigate that system and that frustration with some of the community-based organizations we work with here, we are actually establishing what we are going to call our coordination councils. So what our coordination council will do is actually work specifically with industries that are booming here in Allegheny County and try to connect them real time with what the employers are saying they need. So we would like to, again, working with Cynthia and Peter, work a lot closer with some of those homeless providers. So now we can actually have the information and access on what the industry is telling us their needs and demands are. So as we start to develop and do more employer roundtables, we are actually going to start developing the real-time goals and outcomes based on how we can move the needle forward here in Allegheny County.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next slide. Thanks, Markese.
Yep.
So this, I mentioned this the previous slide, our Employment and Training Advisory Board, or ETAD. And this has been going on since I started here 6 or 7 years ago, and I think preceded my tenure here. So as I said, we meet regularly, brings together homeless providers, training organizations, and workforce, including the one-stop career link. And we've done a number of different things. We mentioned the employer roundtables. We've also held a couple of day-long forums where we've had workshops on a range of things, from dealing with criminal background to support employment, what are the different training programs in the area, motivational interviewing, trauma-informed care, those sort of things. One of the forums, we had a consumer panel, which was really insightful. It was really good to have consumers' voices being able to express themselves and share their challenges and concerns. And we also did an interesting exercise of the shared case conferencing, where, again, bring the two silos together, workforce staff and homeless services staff, have them look at certain case studies, scenarios, and what are the resources that they could bring to the table to address the challenges that a particular client might face. So those have been the forums. We were also engaged in a human-centered design project, which I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on, but we interviewed a lot of employment services providers in the homeless system, gleaned some great insights from those interviews, and formulated a few how might we questions based on those interviews. How might we do X, Y, or Z? And I think most pertinent to our discussion this afternoon is one of our how might we questions was how might we increase providers' familiarity about local employment-related resources. So that's something we're beginning to work on. Finally, I want to mention the ETAB has worked closely with CareerLink, the one-stop shop, and I think it's really going to be a great partnership. It began more seriously about a year ago. We organized tours through the CareerLink facility. A lot of homeless providers staff had never actually been in the center, so we had a tour and a presentation, chance to ask questions, and that has spawned an ongoing dialogue. We're now working with the CareerLink and looking at their processes and how we might make them more tailored to folks with employment barriers, and also developing tools for homeless providers that they can use so they can easily understand the way that the one-stop process works. It's something that they can share with their clients. and kind of have a roadmap through the system so that when they do case management, they and their client can kind of see where they are in that process. Next slide. Right, so work with public and private organizations. So let me say a quick word about these two initiatives, and they're just getting started. We're excited about them. One is a partnership with Pitt, University of Pittsburgh, and we're working with their doctoral students in their occupational therapy department. And it's a 2-year sort of intensive field work with doctoral students, and they're going to be working with homeless provider organizations to initially do an assessment of the employment-related resources that they use and how they serve their clients around employment issues, and then strategize on some initiatives going forward. So we're just getting that started, but it's very exciting. And then people have talked about support employment before, and I think our challenge here is I think, number one, to let people in the homeless services silo know about this program. I don't think it's widely accessed. It's housed here in DHS in the Office of Behavioral Health, so it's sort of a separate silo, and I think it makes it a challenge for folks not directly in those systems to know about it. And so it's just it's a great evidence-based program, and we're hoping to expand participation in it. Next slide, please. So increasing employment and income, again, I think ETAB and things I've mentioned already, those are all initiatives that I think will work toward achieving that goal. A couple other things that we're working on as well. We're seeking funding from a state program to support employment navigators. So the role of the navigator would be really to be a liaison between the workforce system, CareerLink, and homeless providers. They would not be working directly with clients, but they would be linking homeless providers up with services, doing trainings for them, letting them know what resources are out there, kind of be a point person for homeless providers to turn to when they're trying to assist their clients. And Cynthia, I think you're up next.
Yeah, and so we've really been focused on how do we increase income for individuals while they're going through training or while they're getting that early work experience. And so we've been working closely with the Workforce Board to identify what are short-term trainings that have stipends attached to them and prioritizing those for connection to our training programs and making sure they're at the table when we're having some of these conversations. We've also, in that Navigator grant that Peter was mentioning, we've included a budget for training stipends so that individuals who are in our homeless service program can earn some money while they're going to training to help pay for the necessities of life. And then we're also in conversations with the Workforce Board about how do we utilize some of the tools that WIOA has, like on-the-job training and paid work experience, to meet the needs of the individuals that we're serving. And along with that is for youth and young adults, we've been prioritizing connection of homeless youth to summer employment programs and making sure that there are always enough slots, and our local Workforce Board has been incredible at prioritizing youth experiencing homelessness. Next slide. Then I'll also talk a little bit about some of the ways that we have been able to encourage local areas to prioritize. And first, I can't say enough about the need to have direct relationships with your local workforce development organizations. And we have found that people are always receptive and open to at least talking with us, and they might not quite see the fit right away, and sometimes it takes quite a while, but the more that you can engage people, the more that you can ask them to the table when you're thinking about these things. One of the things that we've been told is that it's helpful that we invite the workforce side to the table when we're designing or when we're thinking about workforce, instead of saying, oh, hey, we got this workforce grant, can you help us implement? That it's been appreciated that we're really trying to partner with them and not just kind of go off on our own. Some of the ways that we also more formally provide input on the workforce system locally is the local and regional plans that workforce development boards are required to put out every 2 to 3 years. And so there's an opportunity for each organization or each COC to go through those plans, see what your local boards and regional boards' priorities are, and make sure that homelessness is represented there. If it's not, draw attention to it. There's an open comment period, and that's what that's for community stakeholders to really say what the needs are. The Workforce Development Board meetings are open. There's always a point at the end where people can have, I think, up to 3 minutes or so to talk in most boards. So utilize those forums to make the issues known and to start interacting with the system if you haven't already. We also prioritize serving on workforce development committees. So locally we have, like Peter mentioned, our director is on the board of the Workforce Development Board. There's also different workforce entities. For example, we have an Institute of Politics Workforce Development Committee that I serve on in my role at DHS, so that we're making sure that the human service needs of individuals in employment programs can also be served. So find ways where you can meet the needs of the workforce development system and vice versa. And then also engage the workforce organizations in the movement to end homelessness. I think sometimes there's a tendency to silo organizations, like, oh, well, this isn't exactly a workforce development program, so we're not going to invite them. And what we found is that everything touches everything. And so particularly for economic mobility being such a strong part of everything that we're doing at Human Services and with the Bureau of Homeless Services, we invite the Workforce Board to our youth programming. We invite the Workforce Board to participate in all of our evaluations where they're helping us to score homeless programs. So just don't limit yourself right out of the gate, because a lot of times the conversations that happen in those rooms are the ones that actually lead to addressing the needs that you might not have seen. Next slide.
So what's next? I think as Cynthia mentioned earlier, this is a journey, and we've done some great things, but there's a lot of challenges out there. So what's next? A big thing for us, what's next is the Pathways Forward Challenge initiative, which, as I said earlier, we're really excited about. I'm just going to quickly bullet the things that are part of our proposed activities. One is integrating leadership, which I've already talked about, and we're already doing that, integrating leadership on the workforce side and the homeless services side. We want to integrate data, so we want to integrate labor and industry data, the career link data, the services that they're providing with our human service data. Allegheny County Department of Human Services is really fortunate to have a really robust data. We call it the data warehouse, and we can crosswalk employment-related information and services with a whole host of human services, both services that are provided by DHS and services provided outside of the system, such as involvement with criminal justice or with the public schools. So we're working on that crucial data integration piece. We want to do cross-training across the silos. I think we've done some of that already. Be more intentional about that and do that on a more regular basis. Shared case conferencing, I think it's going to be a somewhat big lift, but we think it'll work. Again, bringing together folks from CareerLink, for example, and case managers on the homeless side, have them actually look at their shared clients and strategize on the best way to go about moving them forward. And I want to say all of this work is being done through the lens of racial equity. I'm sure most of the folks out there face a similar situation with people of color being overrepresented in the homeless system and being underrepresented in employment opportunities. So we need to do this, and we're really excited that we've got an opportunity to do this through this program. Connecting, just the next bullet point, connecting with human services employment programs. Again, I've touched on this already. The support employment is really what we're going to focus on, and our initial work there is going to be to do a crosswalk of who's currently receiving supported employment and HMIS data to see what the overlap is, and that'll at least give us a starting point. Do we need to do more outreach and education around this? What have been the results of for people who are experiencing homelessness in the supported employment program?
And we are all about using our data to inform what we're doing. And so, like many COCs, we have a Move On initiative where we are trying to help individuals who are in permanent supportive housing to move on from the homeless system to independence. And so we have been working with our State Department of Labor and Industry to compare wage data for individuals who are in our permanent supportive housing programs, to use that as one piece of the puzzle in identifying who might be ready to move on, at least from the rental assistance portion of our supportive housing programs. And we are excited to start using that more across the board.
And the next two items is things I've touched on already in terms of what's next. We are really just at the initial phases of these, but partnering with the doctoral students and occupational therapy. We plan to have an initial meeting with them next week and start the assessment of services provided by homeless providers, and then the employment navigators hoping to get funding. But we also have, we're hiring a diversion specialist, and part of the role of the diversion specialist will be to work with those populations. I think the populations that Mindy mentioned who are in shelters aren't likely to get housing, but need employment support. So that'll be part of the role. One of the roles of the diversion specialist is to work on employment for folks in shelter.
And one of the more exciting things from my perspective, we just became a YHDP community. So I'm going to imagine in my head all of the cheers because people are excited for us. But we have invited the Workforce Development Board to be on our steering committee. And so we are really excited to continue strengthening career pathways for youth experiencing homelessness through that.
And I think that's it for us. Markese, I don't know if you have anything to add at this point.
I just want to say I work with an amazing team.
We do too.
Wonderful. I agree. And I'm happy to be working with your team. Congratulations on the YHDP. I just found out. That is exciting.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Please, if you have questions for Cynthia, Peter, Markese, send those in using the question box now. I'm going to share a little bit about some more resources to support this work. So I'm not going to talk a long time, just want to make sure that you know that we have been in this space for a while, collecting lots of lessons learned from communities like Allegheny County and across the country, collecting like what is working, what are the biggest challenges. A lot of the stuff that we've been hearing, we sort of help to communicate back to people like Jasmine at USICH, and so hopefully we can keep this feedback loop going. So on our website, and when you will get a link to the slides after the webinar today, and on each of the slides there's a link where you can find our resources on our website. So there are a lot of free toolkits you can explore. We have these 2-starred toolkits that may be of particular interest to folks on the webinar today. And within these toolkits, I just want to highlight a couple of resources within each one to direct you to. So if you want to start here, It Takes a Community is a WIOA toolkit. So that's the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act that governs the public part of the public workforce system. So this is a couple of resources put together for folks on that side to help guide. Like if you're interested, you want to serve folks facing barriers to employment, and you want some tips on where to begin, we recommend checking these out. Over on the Working to End Homelessness Toolkit, systems work better together. This is a resource that was was largely informed by the place-based projects that we mentioned earlier. So prior to the Pathways Forward Challenge, we had an earlier round of work in communities called the Connections Project, and a lot of those communities told us like what was working, what was not working, where the challenges were, and that you can find that in this resource. And we talk a little bit more, we break down some of the strategies that you heard Cynthia and Peter and Markese talking about, such as shared governance and the importance of using data, sharing data to inform your strategies and programming. And then also we have a resource around integrating employment into your rapid rehousing program. So if there's a takeaway, it's that there are resources for you, they exist, we're continuing to add to them. We have a field building team that can also provide more support, developing and implementing employment programs, other strategies, how to advocate for policy and system change locally and beyond. So you can reach out to us and ask more questions about how we can support your work in your community. I also want to say, you may be thinking like, okay, but what about folks who aren't a part of the Pathways Forward Challenge or connected with us in a more formal way? I recommend signing up for our communications, our newsletters, because we are always trying to think of more creative ways that we can support communities at different stages in this work. So maybe you're just getting started thinking about how to bring people together to increase employment for homeless job seekers, and you're in the beginning phases. We want to support your community as well, and so we're always thinking of new ways to build our network of stakeholders across the country that are moving the needle on this. So I'm realizing at the end of the webinar that I never introduced myself. So my name is Carrie Felton, and I am the project manager for the National Center on Employment and Homelessness. And joining me from our Heartland team is Katie Schnurr, who has been collecting your questions and is going to lead the Q&A now. Please continue to send your questions, though.
Okay, great. So yeah, this is Caitlin or Katie Schnurr. I work with Carrie on the National Initiative team. One thing I want to flag, and this is a back-end technical thing, Carrie, I just got a message that said the recording stopped for this webinar, but that might have been something I clicked on my end, so hopefully it's still recording for you. And if not, just putting that out there. Now, that said, we have gotten a number of questions that have come through, and I think we're a little bit ahead of schedule. So I am going to start putting some of these questions out there. One question that we got, and I think the director of our team, Melissa Young, who has also been listening in, might be well positioned to answer this question is, can someone please elaborate on what it means to, quote, co-enroll people in the WIOA system, especially as it relates to client choice? Melissa, is that something you could answer?
Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Young. I direct our national initiative team at Heartland Alliance. Thanks so much for joining the webinar today. I'm not entirely sure if the question is directed around co-enrolling in WIOA, multiple WIOA services. I think one of the realities and one of the opportunities within WIOA is that you can co-enroll individuals in both Title II WIOA resources and Title I. and you can, Title II resources are traditionally education and literacy programming. Title I programming is largely around training. I have oversimplified that to a great degree. I am actually thinking that perhaps Markese, if you're on the line, you might be able to elaborate on that a little bit more.
So here in Allegheny County, co-enrollments, when we think about co-enrollments, we actually think about co-enrollments in the sense of whether, let's say, a young adult who's 18 or older is trying to enroll in a youth program, but that young adult can also enroll in an adult program that's 18 and over, and that's our Title I Youth and Adult dollars. So we've been trying to identify which ways a young person who may need some more intensive services, because on the youth side, they can get those intensive services, and not always in the Title I system on the adult side, they can receive those services. So when a customer comes into our system, we try to identify what works best for them. But if they feel like they want to be served by both youth and adult, we do allow that, but that's where the funding comes in. They can only be funded through one of the entities, though, but they can receive services through both if they feel like that's useful for them. So, I don't know if that's helpful, but.
Yes, I think so. I will say that there are a number of, interesting. Okay. There are a number of follow-on questions to that. So for the person who has really specific questions, I will connect you to via email following the webinar. One thing I did want to clarify is that Allegheny County is in Pennsylvania. So that was a question that came up. Another question that has come up is, and I think this could go over to the Allegheny folks overall, is that you mentioned that your local workforce board has been open to prioritizing youth experiencing homelessness for services. Could you all talk a little bit about how that became a priority on the workforce side? And yeah, just kind of what it took to get the workforce side to care about this population.
You say youth, correct?
I did say youth, yes.
Okay. So, and WIOA is actually one of the eligibility requirements for WIOA. If a young person is coming to the system and they have some homeless issues and they are already eligible for the program. So just taking that step alone, that made it a priority for us. But one of the things that we are trying to do is to try to be more inclusive on the adult side. So how can we make sure that the adult population are getting the opportunities that everybody else is getting who are, who are currently experiencing homelessness? And we are grateful to have Earl Buford here, our CEO. And he actually takes his population very, very serious. And in Milwaukee, where he's originally from, he actually started a council for homeless individuals and homeless services to try to actually connect them directly with employers. And that's one of the approaches and things that we're currently in the process of doing here in Allegheny County. So a lot of focus on homelessness is really due to, Earl wanted to create these partnerships with our organization, with Department of Human Services. So we've just been blessed to have, good leadership who really takes this work serious.
Great, thank you. Anyone else who wants to jump in on that? And if not, here is another question just about developing these partnerships. Again, I think this is for you all at Allegheny. Do the partnerships that you have together require a memorandum of understanding? And if not, how do you kind of formalize and build accountability for this work?
So as far as with the Workforce Development Board, there are no MOUs. The only MOU was the MOU that required our core partners, which is the Title I, II, III, and IV, to be part of the system, and then those mandated partners. So we do have an MOU for that, which I believe was, the state told us we had to do. But as far as MOUs with community-based organizations or data sharing agreements, we actually don't have any of that with any of the community partners, but that's one of the things that we do want to try to develop. And as I mentioned earlier about our ability or our want to create a coordination council, the coordination council, we are actually thinking about having an MOU because we hopefully that'll get community-based organizations who are truly interested in making this push and this moving the needle. Once they sign on to the MOU, there will be some small things that we are going to require them to do. We are still in the process of figuring out what that MOU will look like, but it'll be on small scale, and it's really just to connect the employers to the supplier, to the people who are really looking for jobs.
Great, thank you. So this is another question that has come up in a few different ways. So I will give a little bit of context and then get to the question. So someone writes, I always thought that workforce development boards were under pressure to keep people employed for a certain length of time, and that people experiencing homelessness have trouble keeping jobs and negatively affect numbers and reporting for those boards, therefore are seen as a disincentive to serving or prioritizing referrals from the homeless service system. What does a workforce board see as an advantage to doing this work? And then I think a related question is, are there any plans in place to adjust WIOA policies so that they're more accessible to people who face barriers?
So that's a loaded question. I can speak to what we are trying to do here in Allegheny County. So as far as the policy goes, we advocate to the best of our abilities, but one of the great things that we do, and we try to tell all of our providers, at least the providers that are funded by the Workforce Board here in Allegheny County, is if there are things that you want to advocate for, you have to be straightforward and communicate that with us. When you communicate that with us, then we can take it to the state. But if we don't get that information, then it's hard for us to advocate on their behalf. But for the most part, our community-based organizations here, at least those who are being funded by workforce dollars, they are able to communicate with us what their needs are, what they feel like is working and what isn't working. And then we do try to do our due diligence and coordinate and speak to the state. We're willing to get smacked on the hand if it's something that the state is going to definitely say no to. But if nobody starts the question or nobody asks the question, then it's really hard for us to move the needle. But like I said, for the most part, the community-based organizations here, they do come to us when there are things that they feel like are just not right. And there was another part to that question?
Another part, and I think that this is like more towards a national policy question, although perhaps folks who are working in Allegheny have thoughts on this as well, which is, what are, I think it was, sorry, I lost it. If there are any steps that might be taken to make the workforce system more accountable to serving people who have barriers to employment. Yes, plans to adjust WIOA so it can be more accessible.
So again, the one thing that, as Peter and Cynthia had mentioned, what we're trying to do is to create more access points and awareness of what services WIOA has to offer to all individuals. And when you start looking at the federal level, then we can only advocate on the state level, and then once the state, if it's something that they feel like they want to take further up, then, they have to do that on a national level. But I always say, if you have a workforce board, continue to push your workforce board to think outside of the box. And I think the first part of your question also talked a little bit about the employment numbers and the outcomes, that homeless service or homeless individuals tend to lose employment much quicker than those who are not homeless. Again, that's something that we definitely think about too. But here in Allegheny County, we do have a rich source of foundations. So we do try to create a lot of other opportunities when it comes to our training programs, especially when it comes to funding training programs and how we can connect those fundings to the federal dollars or to the state dollars to make individuals feel a little bit more not pressured to make sure we are meeting those employment numbers. So we try to be very creative and thinking outside of the box on how we can serve the maximum individual, but making sure that the community-based organizations also don't feel that pressure that if they're working with someone who is facing homelessness, to get them employed.
And this is Jasmine. If I could just jump in and build on what Markese has said, which is, I think is right on as you think about the role of local and state partners. And then I think from a federal perspective, right, there are a number of steps that are moving us in the direction, I think, of being much more coordinated so that it doesn't feel like, you know, the systems are working at cross purposes or that there are those perceived disincentives, at least from a workforce side. And that's the reason for the increased focus on the role of employment within Home Together. That's the reason for the policy priority in the COC NOFA. We now have this joint statement. So this is really about pulling these two systems together so that we can be really clear, right, from both perspectives, what are the challenges in serving populations that may have increased barriers to employment, who may need some of those extra ancillary supports to be successful, and then hearing directly from our workforce partners on what the challenges are from their perspective when they are trying to be responsive to the federal requirements, right? And so looking for those opportunities to test and to pilot different models of employment and training and demonstrating and helping to perhaps define what success looks like, and it may be different for different subpopulations. So, you know, from the federal perspective, one of the things we appreciate on webinars like what we're hearing today is to be able to hear directly from the field, both what your questions are, what your concerns are, and then to be able to learn from places like Allegheny County and how they're being responsive. And then that also helps us at the federal level to see where we still need to fill some of those gaps.
Great, thanks, Jasmine. Anyone else who wants to jump in on that question?
Yeah, this is Melissa Young again from the Heartland Alliance team, and I'll just so appreciate both perspectives. I think the last thing that I would just urge folks to consider is one, taking a look at our WIOA planning and implementation toolkit for some guidance and support around some of the questions that you're asking relative to the workforce system. But I'd also encourage you to just be mindful that, especially as it relates to the workforce system, there's a tremendous amount of discretion at the local level, and that discretion goes down to the development of performance measures. And really within WIOA law, there is a strong emphasis on developing those performance metrics with a strong focus on the characteristics of individuals being served and the local economy. And so we would just really encourage folks from the homeless side and the workforce side to be really working together as those performance measures are being developed so that they do reflect the strengths of the population and also the needs of the population relative to performance. So again, take a look at our toolkit resources for some support and guidance around this. Also, really encourage folks to continue to reach out to us, and we can be helpful in also directing folks to other places around the country where there has been a really strong commitment by workforce boards, just like in Allegheny County, to supporting these populations.
Great, thank you so much. So we do have a lot of questions still coming in and a little bit of time. So I'm going to go ahead and pitch out another question that came through, which I think we know is definitely important in this work. So the question, and I think this would be for maybe the Allegheny Pathways Forward team overall. And the question is, have you considered, or what are you doing around returning citizens who are re-entering the community and may face all of the barriers from housing discrimination to employment discrimination? So how have you seen the impact of the criminal justice system play out in your work or in this project? And how are you addressing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's certainly a big part of a lot of the work that is going on in DHS. We have a jail collaborative. We've got some significant grant money to look at reducing the jail population and reentry services, particularly around employment. I think one of the positive things we've seen with the employment and training advisory board that I mentioned is some of the training organizations specifically work with populations of reentrants. So that's been really positive. They're very active and sort of vocal about their support of this population, and they've been very successful programs.
We've also been very fortunate that the city of Pittsburg and Allegheny County have both embraced ban the box type movements. And so on a local, county, and a statewide, where we've recently passed a clean slate law to help individuals expunge their criminal records so that employment and housing have fewer barriers to them. I think this is definitely a population that everybody locally is really looking at. And so we've participated in different forums. There's a local community college who has had day-long symposiums for employers about the benefits of hiring individuals with criminal records that we've participated in. We've had day-long expungement day events where it's providing free legal assistance to anybody with a criminal record to figure out, are they eligible for the clean slate law, or how can they be eligible, what's the process? So we've really tried to partner on anything we can that helps to reduce barriers to employment and housing for the people we're serving.
I would also add, just based on the experience in our employer roundtables, I was really encouraged by listening to HR people that most of them really looked at people on an individual basis. Obviously, there's some kind of disqualifiers depending on what the job is, but that was my general takeaway is employers were open to looking at folks individually.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. And I think I'm going to have this be the last question. If we didn't get to answer your questions, one of them are a little bit technical or highly specific, we will do our best to follow up via email. But I'm going to throw the last question out. I suppose that could be to any or all of our panelists. And that question is, for communities that are just getting started in trying to advance employment opportunities for people experiencing homelessness, what is a good first step?
I'll jump in. I think it's the simplest first step. It's go to a meeting and start talking to people. Bring up the issues and the challenges that you're having, ask questions, point out what you're trying to do, and ask people to be thought partners in this with you. Reaching out is really what we've found to be most helpful at just getting something started, starting a conversation.
So I would add to that, initially getting a lay of the land, like what's your baseline? One of the early things that ETAP did when I came on board is we went around and we talked to all the different neighborhood employment centers, not part of the public workforce system, but neighborhood-based centers, just trying to get a sense of like what are the services they provide and who do they provide and what are their assets and what are their challenges, and doing an honest assessment of what are your homeless providers doing, like what are their capacity, what services do they provide, kind of drilling down a little bit to understand what services do they really provide and what are the resources that they need. So yeah, I would recommend just getting a lay of the land initially.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just, based on what Peter and Cynthia said, I think that the biggest thing is when, I guess, anytime you're looking to start something, I think from my perspective, it's just allowing room for failure. I think that allows you to adapt to whatever new opportunity you want to try to approach. And as long as you're allowing that space for failure and frustration, I mean, I think anything is possible. So.
Great, thank you. Anyone else who wants to jump in to answer that first step question?
Yeah, this is Jasmine. I would just, I think, to support all of the strategies that have just been shared by the team, I think use some of the resources that have been shared on this webinar, right? There's a lot of great background material so that folks can come to some of these conversations feeling like they have some of that essential foundational understanding of the issue.
Great, thanks, Mindy. Go ahead.
I'll just add in one more thing. Obviously, everything everyone else has already said, but I think also it's really important from the beginning when doing homelessness work, obviously, but starting something new in your community, to make sure that you're really grounding it in the perspectives of people with lived experience. So making sure that you're incorporating them from the start as partners to help inform this work as you begin to move forward on it.
Great, thank you, Mindy. So I'm going to kick it back to my colleagues over at National Initiatives to wrap up the webinar. One thing that I just wanted to add is we did have someone tell us, great webinar, it's just too late for this year's NOFA because the NOFA applications, as you all likely know, are due in about 10 days. So I just wanted to completely acknowledge that. We realized that the webinar came in a bit under the wire, but hopefully the webinar can serve as a resource moving forward, thinking about what Mindy said about how the NOFA is kind of a template for the work throughout the year. And given that we have continued to see employment be elevated as a priority, both in the federal plan to end homelessness, this year's NOFA, systems performance, hopefully this information can be useful moving forward. And with that, back to you all.
Yes, so next steps. As I said, the recording and slides will be emailed to you. We will do our best to follow up with individual questions in the coming week to make sure we can address them if at all possible. The contact information for the speakers today will be included in the slides. In the follow-up email for the webinar, I'll also include my contact information. And I just want to say, please, please, please don't hesitate to send me an email, either a question about something we talked about on the webinar today or something else related to employment and homelessness. We really do want to hear from you all. So with that, thank you so much to our speakers, to USICH and the National Alliance to End Homelessness for helping to get the word out about this webinar today, and to all of you who joined, especially for the great work that you're doing ending homelessness. So thanks and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.